Alrighty, hello, people of Earth. My name, once again, is David Bernard, and this is the Parallel Perception podcast with Lujan Matus. He's the author of 8 books. He is the founder of the movement system Loban Pi, and if you've heard any of our talks, it's some crazy stuff. So let's take it away. My first question today, Lujan, I'm going to go deep, deep down the rabbit hole. This is something that I think is a component to almost everything that you talk about, and it has to do with singularities. So, to me, a singularity represents infinity. That there's this thing in math. It's a paradox where they do this little exercise. It's like a brain teaser where they talk about, if I want to move from point A to point B, first I have to go to 1/2 of B. And then in order to get from that 1/2 point of B to B, I have to go to 1/4 of B. And obviously, I will always be able to divide the amount of space that I have to travel in half, meaning that I will never actually get to B. I just get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And in the context of infinity, you can always zoom in. And the further you zoom in, the bigger the cavern between that actual place where infinity exists and the place where you are traveling. And yet we travel every day. We get from point A to point B every day. We flip our state of consciousness from wakefulness to sleeping. We never are aware of the transition in between. You call us to try to point our attention at that and experience what it is to actually move through that space of infinity, or bardo. This is something that intellectually it just breaks our brains, right? We can understand in a 2-dimensional way or even 3-dimensional way what it means to travel. That I can focus where I want to go, and I can get closer and closer and closer to that place. But in terms of the experience of our lives, something happens where our state just flips. And in order for it to flip from positive to negative, or whatever the relevant context is, we have to move through that infinite space and that 0 point to get from the perspective that's on this side of the line to the perspective that's on that side of the line. And we don't know how we did it. And we don't know that you can just like continue to collect negative ions, and that there's a saturation point where, like in osmosis, when a cell moves from taking water in to pushing water out, right? We have this idea that as the sodium ions collect on the outside of the membrane, that once you have the right number, then the polarity shifts, and the water goes from holding to releasing, or vice versa. But that's not real. There's not a number that is we're over the median, we're over the middle amount, and now we're in an excess of polarity, and now the state flips. That's not real. You can't count ions. So what is happening, first of all? What is it that determines when we make a transition through physical manifest reality into infinity and back out to the other side, whether that's moving from consciousness into dream state or vice versa, or any of the other things in our life, moving from point A to point B, changing your state from sitting to standing, whatever it is. And hopefully that wasn't too far down the rabbit hole.
Well, to be or not to be, that's the question. But it is a mechanistic universe. Now, even if I look at my experience with God, we're going into that from a waking state into an empty state, into a dreamless state, back into an empty state, and then back to waking. So going into this, it's mechanized. It's a mechanistic universe, quite frankly. So what you're saying is that it depending on consciousness will depend on the mechanization of your capacity to integrate with your environment to fulfill your needs and your wants and your dreams. So the first thing we've got to look at is that when the times that I have seen this universal consciousness, this cosmic consciousness, or this God consciousness, it's been mechanized. But it's been so mechanized. Yeah, it's been mechanized. I think the third time I saw it, it was mechanized under the ground, and it was oscillating like a machine. And then when I saw it in the universe, it was like a hologram. It was going in and out of itself in a mechanized fashion. And when I looked at the last times I looked at it, it was very, very complex. But the complexity was a functioning of the manifest universe in terms of the subtleties of the manifest universe. There's a mechanization that we have to understand in terms of harmonizing with it. So when your eyebrow went up there, Dave. So this mechanization, if you realize the mechanization, you'll see that even people have a mechanized prospect inside of themselves, so they have to shift and move from one perspective to another. There's a mechanized prospect of changing the delivery of our consciousness of our body into a state of realization in terms of the mechanistic nature of our environment to get into the magical state, or the state that is behind that mechanized nature. So it is kind of mechanistic. Is that a good word? Is that a real word?
Yeah, this makes me think of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Elijah, where they describe the vehicles that the angels arrive in, and it's like it's very mechanized. Like, it sounds like a spaceship, but it's wheels within wheels. It's eyes within eyes. Like it's something that sounds highly designed in a technological kind of a way.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've actually seen it. They're wheels within wheels with eyes upon them. They see everything internally, see everything externally. And seeing this, when I found out that it was described as an angel, it was a holographic image. It was like a hologram that had light essence within it, and enormous amount of information, because the point of view was eternally moving like this. So it was like the mechanized God consciousness that I saw, but the God consciousness wasn't so. It looked like a machine, really did look like a machine, but it was a machine which was sentient. And that sentience was then transfer. If you can see it, it transfers into your body, and then you learn the process of what you see here, what you see there. You see many different things at once. So you begin to speak on behalf of what you notice in terms of how you see it, because we're surrounded by these eyes in our body. So if you see it universally like this, it actually is inside when you notice it. So it's a matter of spotting one thing and speaking to it, where maybe somebody might be mute in terms of not being able to notice what is going on. And when you open up that viewpoint, then a certain avenue or a certain perspective becomes available. And usually people stay in their one perspective and sit there and say they've discovered something. The mechanized nature of our consciousness means you've got to notice many things at once. And as you notice many things at once, you become different frequencies inside of your body. And then when you meet someone who's stuck in one frequency, or even 3 or 4 frequencies, which seem quite incredible, you begin to note where they are, and then you understand completely. But you can't verbalize what you understand. It goes inside of you and then reflects back in a way which is progressive, which is different. Your eyes become different in comparison to the mechanization that you've noticed. And then the transformation occurs. So when the last time I saw the vision of this you could call it a God particle, but it was huge. It was universally huge. It was rotating in such complexity, and to be captured in that complexity, you have to then assume that you don't understand, but assume that it's part of your nature. And as soon as it becomes part of your nature, then what you don't understand becomes voluminous. But it's voluminous in a way that you can't really notice it, because it comes upon you without any sort of prompt. It's invisible to you until you begin to notice what's not invisible.
Yeah.
So when you notice something, then it automatically transfers. Like if you see a hologram, the hologram is not really vibrant. When you see normal holograms, not very vibrant. But when you see a hologram that has dimension, that vibrancy goes into the dimensional nature of your capacity to receive. And then you become that, but you grow into that very incrementally. And it's fast. It's not that slow. It's fast. But you've got to see it first. Yep.
Yeah, I have 2 things on that. One is that what that makes me feel when you're describing it is that it connects to this idea that in the Bible that you can't look upon the face of God, and the idea of face of God, the face the fear of God. That I think the way that that's usually translated in churches is this idea that the wrath of God is, so extreme that you in your lack of purity is state,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
grossness of your state by comparison,
Yeah.
it makes it too much for you to be able to endure. But when you're describing the mechanized visual representation of God, what it makes me feel like is, how can you endure to experience that? And so the context of the vastness of that and the complexity of that and the size and scale of that is something that we would shiver in the face of.
Okay. When it comes down to the wrath, the wrath has got to do with what did you deal with and what can't you face. So when you go into a state where you need to review, and you're facing something very, very pure, then it'll hit what's not pure. That's your wrath, your own wrath being reflected back to you. There's no wrath of God.
Right.
There isn't. There's total understanding, love, and a sense of communion in terms of what you need to evolve to next. But you've got to make sure that every reference point inside of yourself is not discordant in terms of your own purity or the obstacle which may be put in front of you in terms of a feeling you need to take off the altar of your perception because it's not beneficial. So you even have your own wrath. When you go into a nightmare, you got the reflection of your own wrath coming upon you. And it may be because you had an experience, and then the experience becomes a feeling. The feeling becomes visual. That's just like living and dying. So the wrath has got to do with discordance within your body. There's no wrath of God. The wrath has got to do with our inability to be harmoniously traveling, no matter what position, even if it's a very, very low position, as long as the heart's there, then it's very high. So it's what we do and what we don't do. It doesn't matter if you sweep a street, it's how you sweep the street.
I got wiped. Hold on a second. Oh yeah. So your ability to be able to perceive these kinds of things and have these experiences must be a reflection of, how refined the purity of your state of being has become in your practice and your experience in your life. Right.
The first thing I would say, I put myself on the lowest common denominator. I don't see myself as high, but I don't see myself as low. So then you become the person that you meet.
Yeah.
Then you discover where you land in comparison to your environment. So then you sort your environment out in comparison. So purity has got to do with harmonizing. Yeah. And then through the harmonization, clearing.
But I've had experiences where I've touched into realms that I wasn't prepared to witness, and I've had that feeling of overwhelm that comes from the disparity between my level of purity compared to the thing that I was witnessing. And it's definitely, I think I know what you mean when you're talking about your own wrath. It's you walk through self-judgment and criticalness and that kind of thing in comparison to the thing that you're witnessing, but even inside of my own experiences, there's a certain amount of overwhelm that comes with it. If I expand that out to what it would be like to see a representation of God, I would assume that the possibility or likelihood of having some kind of nervous breakdown in comparison to that, because it's so
okay. This is really interesting you say that, because the last interview I said that when we meet people that are kind of blocked, we run into that block, but it kind of like lands inside of our body, and then we appropriately assign ourselves to the block because we're not blocked. When I was maybe 22, 25, I'm not really sure, I had a very, very strong vision of God, and I was on top of a mound of looked like sand. And I was right at the top, and this beautiful feeling waved through me. As it waved through me, it discovered something that it bumped into. As soon as it bumped into me, I fell halfway down. And when I fell halfway down, there was a black scorpion upside down. Just totally not even functioning. And then somebody said in a deep voice, dressed in oh gosh. This is really a strange experience to tell you. They were dressed in old English armor and pointing at me saying, "You will come to know God," like this. And then I thought, okay. I didn't really understand at that particular point. But what happened was that feeling bumped into something which I hadn't emptied myself of. So God consciousness in terms of bumping into somebody, and you're clear enough for them to see that you're bumping into their resistances, exactly the same. Exactly the same. There's no difference. So when I look at that experience, and now I look at my experience now, I can say, okay, I understand that now. So the function of a human being is to empty somebody of their dilemma. Exactly the same way that this showed me that you need to empty that. You've been put in exactly where you belong. Now make your journey back up. Yeah. And that's that's when you say that, it's like it's kind of like I've never known what that experience really meant until this point. So your communion with me in terms of your explanation woke me up to what the first message that was given to me when I was very young, just now. And I understand it, and I've explained it before, and I'm saying, well, you bump into this, you do that. I didn't realize that's what it was. That's what that entity was showing me. That beautiful, loving, warm wave of bliss coming upon me was showing me, okay, I'm bumping into this. Go down to where you belong. And then I went to Thailand, and I was teaching Three Treasures, and the Thai people were talking about me and everything like that. And a big black scorpion walked through just before I arrived, and they said, "Oh, the teacher's coming." Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So culturally, I didn't know what this meant in terms of the black scorpion upside down. It just meant that I've got something to deal with that I need to move through. And as I've grown, now that you said that, I woke up. So you helped me wake up about that. So this is what it's all about. And it's not saying I've arrived because I realized. No, I've realized because you just explained something that is totally in accordance with what I experienced when I was younger. You gave the voice to my experience through what you just said. So you have to be humble enough to say, David, you just woke me up. Now I realize what I experienced because of what you said. This is a beautiful thing. So the last time I saw God, it was a fractal anomaly, and I said, I feel so humbled by this. There's so much that's meant to come upon me in terms of the complexity. And then you speak the first experience I had, and then I realized. So it's all interconnected in terms of our nature. We've all got something to give each other. We've all got something to help each other wake up. It's just a matter of caring enough. And then giving you recognition that you touched on something that I've asked a question about all my life. You just gave me the answer. So I'm in a state of gratitude for that, because now I understand what happened. And I've been waiting for a very, very long time to understand what that meant. And then there was another point. I'll tell you that there was another point. I went down to the bottom of this particular mountain, and then it said, don't speak. And when it said don't speak, some strange buzzing thing came and lopped my head off. Said, don't speak. Yeah. And then I won't speak. But speaking in the mind, don't speak, don't be noticed. Yeah, but don't be noticed by yourself, because if your mind is active, then it cuts you off from your heart. So now I understand everything now. Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that makes me think of Shiva. Does he have heads in his hands?
Oh no, that's Kali.
That's Kali.
That's a representation of our inevitable end in terms of the empty bone principle, Tibetan empty bone principle, is that they usually have malas made out of skulls just to remind you that you're going to die, and be careful while you live. That when you die, that the prospect of these many heads that you've got around your neck is that don't have anything inside that. Empty bone principle.
You do talk about Shiva sometimes, and I think you said that Shiva means something like that is not.
Shiva, yeah, something that is not.
And in
that which is not, yeah. So we are, but we are not simultaneously.
And in Judaism and Christianity, God's name, is it Yahweh, is I am, right? That
Yeah.
it is it.
Amen means I have arrived.
I have arrived. Amen. Oh yeah. So that makes me wonder if it's like, I think everybody that believes in any kind of religion has a sense that this is the one true God. But is it possible that these are aspects of God, that the Yahweh God is representing the yang principle of God, that it's the active kinetic, the warring, the wrathful, the Old Testament God?
I mean, the wrathful is got to do with the wrathful nature of human beings, and to justify that wrathfulness by saying, I've got God behind me, that's the worst thing could ever be done, because many treacherous things have happened in the name of this. It's our wrath that we're reflecting on something which is empty, so it's now I've forgotten what I'm saying. I've just got wiped.
Well, I was just comparing Shiva to Yahweh, that there's the I am principle and that is not principle, that it's the yin and the yang of
Oh yeah, every single religion, I believe everybody should take the negativity out and just be with the positive, because it doesn't really matter what you worship. It matters who you are. And if it brings you into a state of comfort, the comfort is where you need to arrive. So it's so every single aspect has got to do with we should just forget everything, and our religion is pumping in our chest. Yeah. And we need to bow our heads to that altar, and that altar is inside of everybody's body. And that's worshiping the highest principle. And when you assign your attention to everybody's heart, whether you can or can't speak to them, you're assigning your attention to what's the most important thing. And open heart consciousness is where God consciousness comes from. And the prayer and saying Amen really means I've arrived. So what do you want to pray upon to allow you to arrive? You pray upon there's the situational attunement of people who are out of tune, and hope that they can arrive. And you don't need anything else other than you open yourself up physically. You don't give it a name, you give it a feeling, and you assign that feeling, and the assignment will give it a name.
Yeah. One of the first times I spoke to you was on a private online spiritual guidance, and you spoke of a room inside of your being that has no doors and no windows. And if that's the case, how do you get to the inside of the room? And at the time, I think I said something silly like, in Texas we'd use dynamite to blow the doors open or something. But I mean, it's just, you change your perspective, right? Like that's the answer, is that when you arrive.
Yeah, the walls don't exist.
There is no spoon, as Keanu Reeves. Well, I guess it was a kid that said it to Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
Blaine, come at me.
Ruhan, you mentioned Amen to arrive, and I'm wondering if you could expand on the relationship between these two and the significance of the Om chant.
Well, the Om is basically the expression of the sun. We're nothing without plasma. So the plasma, the photons and plasma, I can see them. So I see the plasmic effect of what flares from people, just like the flares from the sun. And those flares will give information, very, very pertinent information. Photons is something you travel upon that become harmonized and coalesce for you to make you, to allow you to realize you can store this as soma, or something milky inside of your body. So soma is a prospect of photons coalescing inside of your body to fill you full of a misty light. And this misty light, I've traveled to a previous lifetime to show someone that I'd arrived, and they don't need to worry. And the only way that traveling could occur was through affection and love. Okay, no other way. And to remember any lifetime, you always remember the most abundant parts of those lifetimes, because how could you possibly have recognition for the negative if you finally come upon that? You'll be able to see it, but you won't be connected to it, even no matter what's happened to you. Yeah, so the plasma or sunlight or the vibration of Om is a universal call, which is upon every galaxy has a sun. Every quadrant of the universe has suns. Yeah, and we collect that in our field of energy. We collect that, and it becomes available in terms of white mist.
Is the white mist the same as manna?
Explain manna.
So this is a word that exists all over the globe in ancient languages, but it's I think most people are familiar with it in the Bible as the food that God gave to the Israelites when they were lost in the desert. But because they were essentially, vagabond and needed sustenance, they would wake up every morning and there would be manna, and they would collect the manna, and the manna is what would sustain them while they were in the desert.
I think there was some kind of algae that they were growing, I think.
Yeah.
But and existing on that, but really, when you really look at like I've got a movement in Golden Lotus where you do this movement, you collect the moonlight, and then you pull it along your arm like this, you point and then bring it back, and then go to the other way and collect the moon like this, and then you put it along the lines of your arm and then point again, stretch it and let it return. The moonlight is absolutely synonymous with soma, or with the white mist that I've got inside of my body. So, but this white mist virtually is just a coalescence of photons which are cooperating with you because you're unified. So your blood unifies, your photons unify, and then the plasmic energy inside of you becomes alerted in an electric way. Yeah, in an electric fashion. So this electric fashion gives you the capacity to reach out, and then the magnetic energy pulls you back in. So then it's like a seizing energy that holds you to the planet instead of gravity. How's your baby girl going there?
Good. They're just about to head to the park.
Yeah.
Okay.
Luhan, I'm also reflecting on yoga and actually my introduction to even the art of union, being yogasanas and contorting your body to find alignment externally, or even consciousness within each of your members and arms, legs, limbs, and whatnot. Does that relate to the fascia, and how does it relate to developing this cleanliness that you spoke of?
Well, from a yogic perspective, I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to meditation and certain static movements. But Lo Banpai has a stretching and retracting of the fascia, so that you become unified in this way, to unified within the bows of your body, so that you can find union, because union is basically yoking. So the yoke your fascia to find completeness, unification is what yoking is all about. So yoking occurs with this. It's like a milky sort of fascial substance full of water. When they're yoked completely, you begin to have union, and you discover higher states of consciousness through stretching and then retracting inside of the body. And as you retract inside of the body, the electrical principle can become magnetic, and then as you retract, the magnetic principle becomes electric. So there are two major forces in the universe, electric and magnetic. And when you harmonize with this, you begin to understand certain things. But the main thing is communion. Your sense of communion and completeness becomes a sense of communion and completeness with incompleteness. So then your task becomes to complete what's not complete. Yeah. So union yoking, that's what it's all about. Bringing you yoke your physical presence with your internal emptiness. So there's two forms of yoking even there. And being in a state of God consciousness, you yoke the consciousness of the God inside of the emptiness within your being. So your being has to be empty enough to receive this, and then higher states of consciousness beyond this, and just to see the unification and the rules and the ebbs and flows of what is contingent to make sure that you keep harmony, and then to see where you should step and you shouldn't step. And be very careful. Yeah.
From someone who is practicing yogasanas, or a Western perspective would maybe just be yoga, what would be unlocked through their practice of Loban Pai, or what would change for them?
What changed for you?
What changed for me in my practice of
Yeah.
Loban? I think that really developing the type of awareness of the sensation of the opening and then the natural retraction of my muscles, and beyond the muscles, but also getting down to the fascia, and then even to the more subtle airways, being able to recognize how that is interconnected with the universe, so to say. Like, it's not me necessarily moving it, and it's almost like a flow state of movement, to the extent where my mind and my willingly manipulation of my body is absolved. It's literally just playing into natural rhythms of the body. And so far,
so there are two forces inside the body. One's a ground force, one's a heavenly force. So when you find perfect harmony with this, or a certain amount of harmony with this, then you expand and you contract. As you expand, you can release. As you contract, you begin to realize, release. So this is the process of life. This is the process of dying as well, is to be released from the planet and then to realize. And then when you realize, if you're not released completely, you come back. So is to expand and contract, so that you can become totally aware of the prospect of your heavenly process and your earthly process. When this occurs, it has to be through movement. It has to be through very, very subtle, soft movements to discover this. Being static is good as long as you retract the fascia, or realize the retraction of the fascia, or you close your gates, so that your crown gate, your hand gates, your feet gates, your perineal gate, when you stretch and you retract back to your center. You retract back to your regulatory organ, which is your lower dantian. As you retract back to this, then there's a unification there. And as that unification occurs, then the systems of chakras and nadis will be available towards the heart center. Then the heart center becomes available for the third eye process. So, and then the third eye process then can retract back into the heart, and then back to the lower dantian. And the lower dantian is in terms of the mesentery organ, connected to all the left and right hand side, and the central channels, the wind channels, which I've taught you to do, to open your wind channels, close your wind channels to become freer, open, more happy, more loving. And this is really the process. But there's a very intimate connection between the lower dantian and the upper dantian, in terms of this is a regulatory organ. Very, very there's a lot of mist here. So if you don't think, then the mist will sink into your body. And as it sinks into your body, then the mist will appear within your hands, or in between your hands, so that you can see there's a coalescence. And then the animation process is to look at the lower dantian, the chakras, the process of observation of your third eye process, and then bring it into the field of animation in terms of your purity. And your purity functions from the upper and lower, the heavenly gates and the earthly gates open up your central gate to manifest more of a evolutionary process in terms of your feeling of progress. And then you can have non-feeling, but the non-feeling then becomes blissful. Yeah. So, and then the commune, as you commune on the animation center, because it's earth, man, and heaven, but heaven actually interacts with animation process on Earth then interacts with the manifestation process in terms of this governs all the physical manifestation of heart, lungs, and everything like that, and then the lower dantian structurally moves all of the nadis and all of the chakras and spins them appropriately in comparison to your consciousness, and it's like a switches which are being switched around, just like the fractal anomaly that occurs in terms of the higher state of consciousness that we can observe when we get there. And if you put this inside of your body as an animated process, as it oscillates through heaven and earth. And as it oscillates between heaven and earth, the manifestation of your animation becomes more voluminous and you're more capable of experiencing Shakti, which is a transfer of bliss, or a transfer of hope, and a divine state of what's the word? Angelic communion. The more angelic you become, the more heaven and earth coalesces into the animation process. And then the animation process, when you die, becomes quite beautiful. But when the white light or something comes to challenge you, you have to be brave enough to stand there and let it pass through you. So we have to then know that we have to be brave enough to stand still enough to let everything pass through us here too, and then not allow it to be caught inside of us. So this is answering your question in a very, very complex manner. But we have to be clear enough to recognize and release.
What you're talking about with that white light and allowing for it to pass through you and not get stuck or caught on you, that sounds like an incredibly profound test.
It's like 1,000 suns proceeding towards you with their purpose. And your purpose has to be totally in accordance with that light, with that beauty, with the assignment of how strong that is and how determined that is. You have to be as free to become as determined as that.
Luhan, that makes me think that when you're describing those things in terms of us essentially being the nexus between the heavenly force and the earthly force, that would put us in the position like of the singularity. That means that we're not trying to approach the singularity from either side, of the heavenly side or the earthly side, that we actually are in the middle, and there is that infinite aspect to what the nature of humanity actually is, that we can be inside of the septum of infinity looking outward, as opposed to trying to approach it from the outside in. Is that right?
Yeah, from the inside out. And it's in manifestation, this is the most purest manifestation and the hardest manifestation to come upon. Yet some people find this very easy, and some people find this very hard. Yet people who find this very hard can manifest things in the world, but can they manifest what is necessary? And it is non-dualistic. It has no boundaries. It has no parameters. It's very, very wide. But you're contained within what can't be contained.
It's a paradox.
Yeah.
We're about 10 minutes out from our the end of the podcast. I think my mind has been wiped about 17 times, so I don't know that I have anything else to offer this discussion. Blaine, I like where you were heading though, with the energetics of doing these movement practices, and what Luhan is saying, and how that connects us to higher states of consciousness. I do think that kind of in the regular secular world, something like, first of all, just the possibility of having a perception of reality that is in a different state than kind of normal experience, outside of maybe using psychedelics or something, or trance states isn't something that people necessarily ascribe to. They don't, there's no such thing as superhuman cognitive perception or anything like that. That's just some kind of woo-woo or childlike beliefs or something like that. But when you're talking about all of these things, and when you're using the practices with low band pi in particular, it doesn't take very long to have your first experiences where you notice that your external environment is responding to the movements of your body. You can start hearing the walls creak, and you can see like a vortex opening up at your feet or on the wall in front of you or something like that. These are practical experiences that you can have just by stretching your fascia and adopting certain shape forms in your body. What would you say to the person that doesn't see, like, I think we assign something to spirituality, the concept of spirituality, that isn't necessarily fully accurate. It's like it lives in the realm of Santa Clauses and Easter bunnies, that it's maybe something that gives us value internally because it assigns meaning to our lives, and it gives us something to, like a morality code to follow, and a belief structure that makes us feel less at the whims of the chaos of the universe or something like that. But that when it comes down to the mechanics of reality, and that there is a process that we can leverage to climb up the rungs of the ladder and start to have a perspective on what's below from a higher and higher position, that's not something that's so practical. But when you describe it, it's very practical. It's very
very practical.
Yeah. So in terms of is there something that we can do in this format where we can knock on the bell of the people that are listening so that they can actually have internal experience of what we're talking about?
Well, let's just do something. Yeah. So just let me move this away. So if you just now, what you got to do is you got to seat your shoulders open, seat your elbows open, and sink into your dantian, and just move in a circle like this. And as soon as you start to feel that there's a ball, can you see the ball? Can you see? Can you see the photons? So you just look, you ask someone to look, and you'll see that something appears. And as soon as you get this feeling, you take this elastic feeling, and you stretch back and forwards. Compress. Release. Compress and release. And then take it to the shoulder, to the hip, and then compress down. Release. Then turn, and then compress down, and release. Then elbows in, hands follow. Elbows out, hands follow. Now you do a compression, like you squeeze your tummy a little bit, then you release. Let yourself float, open up, and then close. Then release and float, and sink. Then bring yourself around to the ball again. Now, pull. Turn. Now, pull. Then you should have a line of elasticity in between your hands. Compression and release. Head towards the ceiling. And compress and release. And just take your hands and just put them in your lower dantian, and just drop down to that area and feel that for me, I got bliss in my lower dantian. It feels blissful. Look without thinking. And then acknowledge what arrives and follow the feeling and take it back down. Because there will be an expansion and contraction as you do this. What we're going to do is just stay still. Now you feel your heartbeat, transfer your heartbeat to your lower dantian. Then your 2 heartbeats. And eventually this heartbeat appears here as well. So you have 3 containment fields of animation, which are energetic. That's it.
Thank you, Luhan. I know what I felt. Hopefully it translates to the interwebs. For those of you that are listening on Spotify, I'm not sure if the video is going to be available there. If it's not, it'll be on YouTube.
It is on Spotify.
Okay, good. What I felt, I could definitely feel like there was something between my hands. And then as you move around it, you can feel it expanding and contracting. You can also feel like you're stretching it like taffy or something like that when you move around it. Sometimes there's more of a tingling in your fingers. You also the floating sensation that you have when you go in and you contract and then you release. It really does feel like floating in a way that doesn't sort of make sense to your brain that believes in gravity and all of these things. It's like there's a lift force that's pushing you up.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back in the following weeks. We appreciate your time and attention. Please like, subscribe, and share. And lots of love to everybody. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, lots of love to everybody. Thanks, guys.